The forest breathes differently at night. Shadows stretch long between the trees, and the air cools with a weight that presses against your skin. The last light fades, your fire burns low, and you realize this is no camping trip. This is survival. No tent, no tools. Just you, the forest, and the same challenge your ancestors faced for centuries. How to stay warm, dry, and alive until sunrise. But where modern minds might panic, the Native American peoples of this land saw opportunity. A symphony of materials waiting to be shaped into protection. To them, the forest floor wasn't a danger zone. It was a living storehouse of solutions. Every branch, leaf, and fallen log carried a purpose. Every texture, every sound in the woods whispered instruction. They built shelters not through brute force, but through understanding. Knowing how the wind moves, how rain travels down bark, how warmth can be trapped beneath layers of leaves. From the plains to the pine forests, they mastered the art of harmony, creating comfort with nothing more than patience and presence. Tonight, we're stepping back into that world, to learn the forgotten language of shelter. You'll see how nature provides every tool you need to survive a night in the wilderness, if you know how to look. Because the truth is simple. Survival isn't about gear, it's about wisdom. And the wisdom of Native American shelter building remains one of the most remarkable examples of human ingenuity ever known. Subscribe now, because this is just the beginning. Each story we tell unearths another forgotten survival skill. Proof that nature never left us unprepared. We just forgot how to listen. Imagine a time before tents, tarps, or sleeping bags, when survival meant becoming part of the landscape itself. For Native American tribes, the forest was not an obstacle, it was a companion. Each tree, rock, and fallen leaf carried meaning. The wind's direction, the bend of a branch, even the sound of rain through pine needles told stories. Messages from ancestors who had survived 1,000 winters before. When night fell and the forest grew cold, these people didn't search for comfort. They created it. They built shelters with intuition sharpened by generations, understanding that nature always provided what was needed, but never more. The secret was not in strength or speed, but in listening. Before cutting a branch or moving a stone, they observed how animals made their nests, how snow gathered on hillsides, and where moss grew thickest. Nature's clues to warmth and safety. A shelter wasn't just a roof over one's head. It was an agreement between human and earth. The land offered protection, and in return, its gifts were treated with respect. Every branch taken was replaced in spirit. Every stone moved was set back with care. This harmony defined survival. Where modern survivalists see challenge, the ancestors saw opportunity, proof that the best teacher has always been the world itself. Their shelters weren't built in defiance of nature, but in rhythm with it. Lightweight, warm, and alive, breathing with the forest's pulse. Because to sleep safely beneath the stars, they knew one truth. The land that tests you will also save you, if you let it. Before any shelter took shape, the first step was understanding the forest's language, the quiet dialogue between material and maker. Native American builders didn't gather randomly. They selected with purpose. Every branch had a role, every leaf a function, and every handful of moss or bark was chosen for how it interacted with wind, water, and time. They began at the base, the forest floor. Fallen branches were the foundation, chosen not for size, but for strength and flexibility. The best ones came from hardwoods like oak or hickory, aged just enough to bend without breaking. Overhead, pine boughs and spruce limbs formed the skin, their natural oils repelling moisture, their needles weaving into layers that trapped warmth like feathers in a bird's nest. For insulation, they turned to the forest's forgotten wealth: dry leaves, cattail fluff, or even bark fibers beaten soft and packed between layers of debris. The earth itself became part of the construction. Soil piled along the shelter's base to seal gaps and block the cold wind. Cordage was rarely carried. It was made on site. Strips of inner bark from basswood or cedar were twisted into ropes strong enough to hold entire frameworks together. Vines, roots, or sinew replaced what modern minds would call rope. What outsiders might see as chaos, scattered logs and tangled brush, became, in skilled hands, a blueprint for life. Each material offered something vital: structure, warmth, breathability, and strength. By sunrise, the forest had reshaped itself, transformed into shelter, without waste, without harm, and without trace. This was more than craftsmanship, it was intimacy. The ability to know the land so deeply that its materials became extensions of one's own body. With materials gathered, the forest began to transform, not into chaos, but into a living blueprint. The structure of a Native American overnight shelter wasn't random improvisation. It was geometry born from instinct and observation. Every curve, every angle, every intersection of wood and earth was deliberate, guided by centuries of lived experience. The first principle was shape follows climate. On the windswept plains, shelters curved low and narrow to deflect the cold gusts. In dense forests, frames rose slightly higher to catch warmth and allow airflow. The foundation always began with a spine. Two sturdy branches crossed and anchored deep into the soil, forming the skeleton of survival. Around it, ribs of smaller limbs bent inward, overlapping like the bones of a great creature. This living architecture created domes that mimicked the natural forms of animal burrows and bird nests, shapes perfected by evolution. The tighter the weave, the warmer it stayed. Gaps were filled with layers of leaves, bark, and moss, each one working like insulation in a modern home. The outside stayed rough, blending into the landscape, while the inside glowed with trapped body heat and silence. These weren't just shelters, they were microclimates. A properly built lodge could raise interior temperatures by dozens of degrees, powered only by the breath of those inside. No nails, no ropes, just balance, pressure, and patience. The forest holding itself together. By nightfall, what began as a clearing had become a sanctuary. Rain rolled off in thin rivulets. Snow melted at the edges, and inside, the air grew soft and still. This was ancient architecture at its purest. A shelter that breathed with the earth, not against it. When the last branch was placed and the forest grew quiet again, the shelter came alive. Inside, it wasn't just protection from the cold. It was a world reborn. The earthy scent of soil mixed with pine resin, the air held still and heavy with warmth, and every sound, the creak of wood, the whisper of wind, became part of a living rhythm that echoed through the night. Life inside a Native American overnight shelter was carefully balanced between function and harmony. The floor wasn't bare, it was layered with dry leaves, grasses, and furs. Insulation against the frozen ground that also cushioned rest. A shallow pit in the center could hold embers or stones heated from a nearby fire, radiating gentle warmth through the night, without smoke or sparks. Every corner had purpose. A low opening near the ground allowed fresh air to enter, while a vent at the top released moisture and heat, a simple yet brilliant form of natural climate control. If rain came, it rolled harmlessly off the shelter's sloped frame, the forest itself working as a roof. But beyond its design, the shelter's magic came from its spirit. Inside, time slowed. People shared food, stories, and songs carried through the dark by glowing embers. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding with laughter and sighs. It wasn't isolation, It was connection, a reminder that comfort could exist without excess. In that circle of safety, surrounded by nothing but nature's materials, one truth became clear. Survival wasn't about escaping the wilderness, it was about belonging to it. And in that belonging, warmth was never truly lost. At the center of every successful shelter was a silent heartbeat: the fire. To the Native American peoples, fire was more than a source of heat. It was a living spirit, a companion that demanded respect and precision. When built correctly, it transformed the fragile forest shelter into a sanctuary of light and life. Fire placement was a science of balance. It could never be too close to the shelter walls, nor too far away to lose its warmth. In some overnight lodges, embers were contained in a shallow pit lined with stone or clay, allowing steady heat to radiate upward. Others relied on a reflector wall, a barrier of logs or earth placed behind the fire that bounced heat back into the shelter while shielding it from the wind. The fire's warmth did more than heat bodies. It dried clothing, hardened tools, purified water, and warded off predators. Even its smoke had purpose. Deterring insects and preserving food hung above it. At night, the rhythm of the crackling embers became the pulse of the forest itself. Each spark a reminder that even in darkness, life endures. Lighting a fire wasn't taken for granted. Flint, fungus, or even friction between wood and sinew were used to coax flame from breath and patience alone. Once born, it was never wasted. Ashes were saved, coals were buried, and smoke was guided carefully through roof vents to prevent suffocation. To keep fire was to keep balance between warmth and wildness, between control and surrender. Inside that circle of light, surrounded by the whispering forest, the people knew they were safe. Because in the wilderness, fire wasn't just survival. It was kinship. Before a single branch was lifted, the first decision was where to build. And for Native American survivalists, this choice meant everything. The land itself was the first architect, and knowing how to read it was a skill refined over centuries. Shelter placement wasn't guesswork. It was observation, patience, and respect for the terrain's natural intelligence. They studied the forest the way a sailor studies the sea: the slope of a hill, the direction of the wind, the behavior of animals. All were clues. The best spot wasn't always the driest or the flattest. It was the one that balanced protection and resources. A slight rise kept the shelter safe from flooding snowmelt, while nearby evergreens offered insulation from wind and easy access to dry needles for bedding. The orientation mattered too. Openings faced away from prevailing winds but toward the morning sun, ensuring the shelter stayed warm at dawn and hidden from storms at dusk. Proximity to water was essential, but never too close. Mist and cold air collect in valleys, where frost can steal warmth even in mild conditions. The forest floor itself offered silent guidance. Dry moss meant good drainage. Dense underbrush meant poor airflow. Even the direction fallen leaves settled revealed how wind moved through the trees. These small signs formed a code that, once understood, made nature a co-designer. To build without reading the land was to invite failure. To build with it was to guarantee safety. The ancestors didn't impose their will on the forest. They followed its rhythm. And when they lay beneath the woven branches, hearing the wind slide harmlessly over their roof, they knew they had chosen well. Not because they conquered nature, but because they trusted her. What worked in a pine forest wouldn't survive on a windy plain. That's what made Native American shelter design so extraordinary. It changed with the land. Every environment sculpted its own version of survival, each one tailored to its rhythm of heat, cold, wind, and rain. On the Great Plains, shelters had to withstand endless wind. Builders wove flexibility into their designs, using tapered poles that bent but didn't break, and hides layered to defusts like armor. In the northern forests, snow was the enemy, and weight was the weapon. Earth lodges with thick sod roofs held the warmth of buried fires, turning frozen ground into insulation. In desert regions, where days scorched and nights froze, shelter meant managing extremes. Willow frames covered in grass mats created breathable shade by day and trapped warmth by night. In swampy lowlands, bark shacks were raised on wooden stilts, lifted above humidity and insects. Even the shape of a doorway could tell you where you stood. Low and narrow in cold regions to trap heat, wide and open in the south to invite airflow. These shelters weren't copied from one another. They evolved from observation. Each was a conversation between people and place. How the soil held water, how the wind curled through valleys, how animals stayed dry under leaves or burrows. Across thousands of miles, the principle never changed. Build with the land, not against it. Whether through grass, snow, bark, or clay, the goal was the same: harmony, not conquest. The forest floor was the great equalizer. Every community learned the same truth in its own way. The earth doesn't give identical answers, only the right ones for where you stand. For Native American survivalists, wisdom was never bound to a single place. It traveled with them. The true shelter wasn't made of wood or bark. It lived in memory, carried from forest to plain, from mountain to coast. Knowledge was their tent, and adaptability was the rope that held it together. Mobility shaped their design philosophy. Many tribes moved with the rhythm of the seasons, following food sources or shifting weather. Their shelters reflected that flexibility: fast to build, easy to repair, and kind to the land. The framework of a lodge or lean-to could be raised in hours and leave no scar once abandoned. The forest reclaimed what was borrowed, erasing the trace of human hands by springtime. This portability was more than practicality. It was philosophy. To build lightly was to live lightly. To know how to craft a home from whatever the land offered meant freedom from dependence. In that freedom, there was peace. Even in stillness, the lessons of movement applied. Builders learned to read wind and rainfall patterns the way travelers read maps. If the clouds rolled heavy from the west, entrances turned east. If snow drifted deep in the valley, shelters shifted higher up the slope. They didn't fight nature's flow. They adjusted with grace. This mindset turned the wilderness into a teacher, not a threat. Where others saw uncertainty, they saw options. Because survival isn't about staying in one place. It's about knowing how to belong anywhere. That was the genius of Native American shelter wisdom. Every forest, every plain, every coastline could become home. And when they left, the land remained, healed, whole, and ready to shelter the next traveler who listened closely enough to understand. To Native American peoples, a shelter was never just a physical refuge. It was spiritual architecture. Each curve of a branch, each layer of earth and grass carried symbolic weight. The home was built not only for warmth, but for balance, a sacred alignment between human life and the living world. The circle, common in many designs, represented wholeness. From the dome of a wickiup to the round form of an earth lodge, every structure mirrored the cycles of nature: sunrise to sunset, birth to death, winter to spring. When families slept inside, they weren't just protected, they were surrounded by the rhythm of creation itself. The very act of building was prayer. Builders offered thanks before cutting saplings, asking permission from the forest. Each branch was seen as a gift, not a resource. In some traditions, smoke from the first fire inside a new shelter was carried upward intentionally, a greeting to the sky, a message of gratitude for another night of life. The shelter became an extension of the body, breathing, resonating, listening. Its sounds were alive, rain drumming softly on bark, wind humming through the doorway. embers cracking like whispered language. Even after sleep, the connection remained. Stepping outside at dawn, one could feel the lodge's warmth fade into the chill, as if the earth herself exhaled. This was the spirit of home, not a structure of walls, but a relationship of respect. It wasn't built on the land, but with it. And when it was no longer needed, it returned quietly to the soil, completing the circle. Because in their eyes, a true shelter didn't just protect life, it honored it. Today, we live surrounded by walls of concrete and light, yet somehow more fragile than ever when the power goes out or the weather turns cold. The ancestors, with nothing but the forest around them, built security that required no electricity, no blueprints, only understanding. And that understanding might be the most vital survival skill modern humanity has forgotten. The forest shelters of Native American peoples weren't relics of the past. They were lessons in adaptability. They proved that comfort doesn't come from controlling nature, but from cooperating with it. Where modern design relies on insulation and steel, their wisdom relied on the shape of the land, the direction of the wind, and the rhythm of the seasons. Every shelter was sustainable by default, renewable by necessity, and biodegradable by design. Their approach holds the blueprint for our future. When the earth itself grows unpredictable, the answer won't be found in more technology, but in more awareness. To understand how to build with balance is to understand how to live with balance. These shelters remind us that the line between survival and harmony is thin, and that reconnecting with ancestral knowledge doesn't pull us backward. It pulls us back to center. Because in the end, the genius of Native American shelter wisdom wasn't just in surviving one night. It was in creating a lifestyle that could endure every night. To rediscover that wisdom is to rediscover ourselves, not as rulers of nature, but as part of it. And when the modern world grows loud, cold, and uncertain, maybe the greatest survival lesson of all is still waiting, whispered by the forest, ready to teach anyone who pauses long enough to listen. As the firelight fades and the forest hums back to life, one truth lingers in the quiet. We were never meant to be strangers to the land. Every branch that bent to shelter us, every leaf that cushioned our sleep, and every ember that carried warmth through the dark was part of an ancient conversation, one humanity has forgotten how to hold. The Native American shelter builders didn't just survive the wilderness, they belonged to it. Their craft wasn't born from fear of the elements, but from trust. Trust that the earth provides everything needed when treated with respect. Each shelter, from a simple lean-to to a sturdy earth lodge, was proof of harmony, a living contract between human hands and natural balance. And maybe that's what the modern world needs most, to listen again, to step away from the noise, the screens, and the concrete walls, and remember what it feels like to live with nature, not against it. These stories aren't relics of a distant age. They're blueprints for resilience, sustainability, and peace. If this journey opened your eyes to that forgotten wisdom, don't let it end here. Subscribe now, because every story we tell brings you closer to the roots of human ingenuity, the survival lessons, the architectural brilliance, and the spiritual harmony that kept people alive long before civilization ever claimed to. Tomorrow, we'll uncover another chapter, another spark from the ancient fire. Because somewhere between the whispering trees and the glowing coals, the forest still speaks, and it still has much to teach us. The only question is, are you ready to listen?